Polaris and its consequences cannot be overstated. It was, for all intents and purposes, the beginning of what I like to call modern Wizard101, an expansion which successfully altered several of the game's fundamentals: quest objective frequency, instance design, and narrative presentation, to name a few. Polaris gave the game a new way of thinking and speaking, providing the template every expansion thereafter would use. The specifics of that template I've already covered in another video, so I won't repeat them here, but it is those specifics why I've often cited Polaris as being my favorite world in the game. It showed me a version of Wizard101 I hadn't even considered possible. We have Polaris to thank for characters like Miranda Briar, the product of modern Wizard101's proclivities. Miranda is nominally Arc 5's big overarching villain, but this isn't the best way to understand her character. This description ties Miranda to an archetype like Malastare, Morganth, or even Grandfather Spider, someone who would pop in for a key moment to make some threats, but were otherwise absent on a quest-to-quest basis. Modern Wizard101 doesn't really organize itself around these characters anymore. Case in point, Arc 3 definitely did not revolve around Spider the same way Arc 2 did for Morganth. Instead, the third and fourth arcs were fond of characters like Mallory or Design, people we could periodically join and help facilitate their transformation. These were characters that had to be much more multifaceted than previous arcs' villains simply because of how much more attention they were being given. In this way, Miranda is not so much the Malastare or Morganth of the 5th arc as she is its Mallory or Design. The draw here is that, unlike Mallory or Design, Miranda is a far more antagonistic character to be hogging the spotlight. How are we meant to spend a lot of time with someone who's working against us? Darkmoor utilizes a deft hand here, realizing this ambiguity is the perfect kind of tension to construct the multifaceted character a Mallory Design archetype needs. Miranda is hard to fully read in a way that feels deliberate rather than inconsistent. She claims altruistic motives in wanting to save lives on Earth, but she has little qualm killing Sybil when her plan to overtake the Arcanum falls through. She seemingly takes interest in Lucy's well-being after she's cured from the Scalamance's curse, periodically checking up on her and tending to her needs. In reality, Miranda only wants to see if Lucy will die, her extra years of immortality catching up to her now that she's become human again. Experiment complete, Miranda says, shortly after Lucy disintegrates into a pile of ash. For every heroic-sounding action, a callous disregard for life follows not far behind it. Miranda pleads with us to help in her mission to save Earth, but does she view us as a partner or a drooling toddler to manipulate? In the very first quest of the expansion, the Arcanum promotes us to the position of Scholar of Applied Magics, a rank equaling that of the other scholars. It is a symbol of status and respect for all we have accomplished. There is a cleverness in the juxtaposition between this moment and the many scenes where Miranda calls us by her appointed nickname, Whiz Kid. It's an undermining of our new authority, a sign that despite our pedigree, Miranda sees us as naive, childish, ignorant to the wider happenings of the universe and the forces keeping us down.
Oh, silly whiz kid, no, I'm not here, but he is. You play with Mr. Stone. I have big girl things to do.
This kind of efficient yet compelling characterization plays across the whole expansion, making for a really fun character. It's the kind of push and pull that would have been unimaginable pre-modern Wizard101. But Polaris isn't my favorite world only because of the template it developed. Polaris also did one very neat thing that no other expansion has done since. It introduced us to the Arcanum. Changing the game's central story hub was a pretty bold step. Ravenwood, the Commons, the Professors, they're iconic. Ask anyone about Wizard101, and if they even know a single thing, it will be either one of those locations or one of those characters. So what could have possibly possessed this game into thinking these elements were worth tossing aside for anything else? I don't really know, but I think it was a strong choice, a choice with integrity. It was an indication that Wizard101 wasn't going to rest on its laurels for eternity. Here was a game that was going to try something, and the change has proved lasting. As of this year, the Arcanum has been the story hub for a whole decade, 3 years longer than Wizard City ever was. It would not be wrong to suggest that the Arcanum is now more integral to the legacy of Wizard101 than Ravenwood, despite the fact that, as far as the game's broader cultural contributions go, the Arcanum is a completely unknown quantity. Now, Darkmoor sits in the same position Polaris did 10 years ago. Not only the start of a new arc, but also one which comes after 2 arcs centered in the same location. In that preceding time, the Arcanum has been thoroughly unraveled. Mysterious locked doors have been unlocked, strange dream trees have awoken, a sordid past with an apocalyptic doomsday cult has been mended. What's left to be said about this place? Maybe, with the start of the 5th arc, Wizard101 ought to have itself another shakeup. Which is why it's little surprise then that Darkmoor should take a renewed interest in the Arcanum and in litigating its usefulness. Rather than offer us a new hub, Darkmoor correctly identifies the Arcanum as the singular coolest thing the game has ever brought to the table, expanding its innards to the largest extent we've seen since its introduction. Furthermore, the thing moves. They finally had to make a second space-themed skybox. This might be a bigger deal than the new interiors. It's a not-so-subtle nudge towards the future, that the kinds of worlds we see and how we reach them will not be limited to the spiral or ley lines, respectively. It's a much more overt version of the same promise Selenopolis provided. Darkmoor makes clear that the Arcanum isn't going anywhere anytime soon, figuratively speaking. More importantly, Darkmoor convincingly argues the Arcanum doesn't need to go anywhere. There's life to this decade-old ship yet. This is far from the last smart maneuver the expansion makes. Darkmoor reinvigorates the scholars too. One of my critiques of Arc 4 was that the Arcanum scholars largely fell to the wayside, giving out instructions to the wizard but then vanishing for the rest of the world. This became especially problematic in Wallaroo, where the Arcanum's actions and one of its scholars were directly implicated by the narrative, yet both ended up being no-shows until the last possible second. Not so with Darkmoor, which plays out like an extended apology for Xander's omission. The world prologue naturally showcases all of the scholars as we attempt to avert Miranda's takeover. Then the game focuses more closely on Velma, who joins us on our trip to Darkmoor. She plays an instrumental role in the unfolding of the story, and manages to get an entire zone dedicated to fleshing out her past with the Scalamari. You really can't ask for much more than that. Darkmoor even gives us a small dose of a Polaris-like status quo shift, Velma choosing to stay behind in the newly constructed Shadow School. This school is now the place we'll visit to learn any new Shadow fusions in future expansions. Darkmoor handles the possibilities inherent within a brand new story arc well, and regardless of any structural or stylistic similarities, Darkmoor situates itself alongside Polaris in the simplest and most obvious way possible. It's a really good world. In fact, it might be Wizard101's new best. Every arc in Wizard101 has its own unique strengths and weaknesses. Yet if we were to take a poll on everyone's favorite arc, I'm confident Arc 4 would rank last by a significant margin, now and probably forever. This is upsetting to me. Let it be known that I am not and will never be an Arc 4 hater. It's not going to happen. However, I do think I can articulate one reason as to why people might have been underwhelmed by the most recent worlds. It can only be Arc 4's biggest weakness, zone design. But let's be specific here. While there was a lot of discussion surrounding zone design during the years Arc 4 was coming out, the conversation mostly centered on the efficacy of reused assets and area layouts. I'm going to skip past that debate entirely, mostly because I think it misses a key part of the problem. We can still make an insightful critique of Arc 4's zone design by talking exclusively about the arc's original zones. Consider Arc 2 for a second. Contrary to that earlier poll, I think Arc 2 is, without question, the most troubling arc of the game. Its weaknesses are omnipresent. A deluge of tedious quests, cookie-cutter boss fights en masse, and a narrative that spends 4 out of 5 worlds being nonsensical when it's not altogether non-existent. Let's just say Chrysalis's back is breaking from all the carrying it's doing. If you want a fun challenge, try to construct a timeline of Arc 2 that doesn't end up with every important character in the story all somehow being at least a few centuries old. And don't get me started on the developer's hopefully defunct explanation for this, or the retcon-filled prophecy Morganth spends the entire arc trying to fulfill. Or do, it'll just have to be a separate video. Amongst all these pressing weaknesses, however, there is one aspect Arc 2 absolutely nails: its zones. Take a zone like Last Wood from Chrysalis. It starts off pretty bleak, a patch of forest burned down by conflicts against Morganth's forces, leaving behind only charred logs and withered ferns. As you move past that arena though, things look a lot different. The forest becomes brighter, more vibrant. There's a group of mice barricading the entrance to a nearby settlement. The architectural design of Peppergrass Nook echoes Bastion, Chrysalis's hub and the mice's former home before they were driven out. Beyond some shrubbery lies a secret path to a waterfall. Further along the path, on the western side of the wood, the leaves turn a distinctive purple as you enter Queen Myrtle Town, overlooking the aptly named Tyrian Gorge, another zone in Chrysalis. Lastly, a secret portal in the Nook takes you to Camp Havoc, the base of operations for Morganth in the area, sitting adjacent from the scorched earth that was the wood's entrance. Wow, I mean, this is quite the zone, isn't it? Let's compare Last Wood to a zone like Caramel's Black Licorice Forest. It won't take me long because truthfully, there's not much to describe. The area starts off about how you'd expect. Some green and brown fields surrounded by the titular black licorice trees. The first little patch you explore shows a clearing of the trees chopped down thanks to Nana's Happiness Initiative, but this seems to be the only part of the forest majorly affected. Walking down the path, we come across the witch's treehouse and eventually a lumber house owned by the Nana Corporation. Taking a right from that central path, we find another branching route, the candy corn farm on the left side, and on the right, a little clearing facing the lake to Gobblerton. End scene. Now, I'm not here to tell you that Black Licorice Forest is a terrible zone. In my opinion, it's a perfectly fine area that gets the job done. But I'm sure you'll agree that Last Wood eats Black Licorice Forest for lunch, right? Why? I would say it's because Last Wood is dynamic. The zone shifts and changes dramatically, and through that change communicates a story about the history of the place, the people living there, and what it's cost them. Last Wood cannot be summarized with a single screenshot. You'd need at least a whole set to communicate the idea. Black Licorice Forest, on the other hand, is far less effective in this. The zone tries to show the impacts the Happiness Initiative is having on the forest, but it doesn't land with nearly the same impact as the ashen parts of Last Wood did because the chopped down segment in Nana's lumberyard look virtually identical to the rest of the zone. Indeed, other than the lakeside at the end, there's really no sense of transformation or progress to the place at all. The witch's treehouse looks as if it could have been arbitrarily plopped down in any part of the zone, rather than, say, existing as a part of a secluded section of the forest, a hidden fairy shroud to hide from the Nana Corporation. I could take a screenshot of Black Licorice Forest and more or less get the general gist of everything from that. The thing is, Last Wood is a well-designed zone even by Arc 2 standards. Still, the principle remains the same across the board. Look at the survey camp, which starts at an enclosed promenade, only to go through some tunnels to reveal a large dome with a crumbling tower. Even a fairly innocuous area like Cloudburst Forest works the same. An overgrown path of towering trees eventually gives way to a whole mosaic of cascading waterfalls. Arc 4 zones rarely surprise in this manner. The nanosecond you enter New Vicorgia, you have understood exactly everything that zone is going to offer you. It is precisely what it says on the tin. The Dreaming is the birthplace of inspiration and innovation, a sacred ocean based off of the Great Barrier Reef. That's a great concept. What it amounts to is a single hallway. I'm glad this hallway is here, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to argue the Dreaming as it is fully capitalizes on its own idea. My argument is not that these snapshot zones are inherently bad. They work especially well when the zone's purpose is to highlight an important set piece. Ruined Alcazar is one of my favorite areas in the game, and that is very much a zone whose essence can be captured with a single photomance. Wallaroo cleverly juxtaposes the eucalyptus forest with the Wabagong territory. One is a dense thicket with a luminescent spring revitalizing the land around it, while the other is a barren wasteland, its own spring completely dried up from overuse. The Wabagong territory is a warning to the eucalyptus forest, one the drovers use to justify their hoarding of the dreaming. There are ways to make snapshot zones interesting. It could be done by adding literal depth, nuance with verticality, or by adding unique interiors. Unfortunately, this is where Arc 4 sort of underwhelms again. So many Arc 4 zones are flat, completely and utterly, and not just the ones based on Australia. In terms of interiors, sometimes you get something flashy. Other times, Arc 4 would default to its worst impulse, caves. So many caves. Entirely too many caves. More caves than you could ever want in a lifetime. Then you'd get a set-piece area like Billabong Resort, wherein the one thing you can't do is actually enter Billabong Resort. I mean, that's just wrong on so many levels. Like, I never expected them to make a whole hotel's worth of interiors, but not even a lobby? There's still time to fix this, King's Isle. It practically writes itself. All you need to do is have us go back there for a world pre-quest to meet someone. We go up to the resort and they crack a meta joke like, "You came all this way to the dreaming but never went inside the hotel?" Fair dinkum, or whatever they say in Aussieland. Then we saunter inside the beautiful lobby and everyone's happy. Bing, bam, billabong. The point is, Arc 4's zones became so concise in their presentation they lost a sense of discovery in the process. Puerto Nuevo is an exception to the rule, but it's using Pirate 101's IKEA as a base. That's an area that came out in 2013, which is sort of what I'm getting at. There's something about the skeleton of the older zones, as compared to the skeleton of the newer zones, which incentivizes the kind of transformations that made Arc 2's zones interesting. So when you combine their one-note nature with a handful of reused assets and geometry on the side, you get a set of worlds that feels decidedly economic in its approach. Budget, if we're feeling less charitable. Which at last brings us back to Darkmoor. I won't claim these zones are the best to ever do it, but I do think they represent a marked improvement over Arc 4. Take the Outsiders camp. Upon first impression, this looks to be the most disappointing world hub in the game's 17-year history. It's a single, tiny circle, probably one of the smallest areas ever created in Wizard101. But then, looking at the world map, I noticed 4 suspiciously congruent circles along a central highway, and that everything in the camp is on wheels, and began to wonder. Sure enough, the expansion makes good on its implication, as the camp physically moves during our journey, its aesthetics changing to match whatever area we're about to enter. This is a really well-executed idea. There have been central hubs that have transformed before, but these were usually minor things like banners, NPCs, or posters on the wall. Never has a zone changed this much this many times before. It's worth 4 photomances at least. So maybe I was wrong. Maybe Outsiders Camp is the best to ever do it. Several Darkmoor zones are refreshingly unflat. The Mortal Plain is built against a large hill, a village of humans at the base who pledge fealty to the castle of vampires atop that hill's winding path, mortals waiting for their turn at Ascension. While I bemoaned the Dreaming for being a hallway, the Scholomance is a grove of winding, intersecting, and overlapping pathways, which can be tricky to navigate if you're not paying attention. It's a zone which is arguably around the same size as the Dreaming, but as I posited, feels more full because of its depth. Darkmoor sports a number of varied interiors, an inn and the Parliament of Night in Graveholm, dark forests at the edge of the plains, spooky tree bridges inside the Howling Lands, the Shadow School emerging from the center of the Black Lagoon, chasing Miranda through her lair in the Scholomance. And not a single cave in sight either. Wizard101 has usually avoided making day and night an important factor in the story, probably to avoid having to create 2 different versions of the same area, but it was bound to come up in a world where most of the species can only come out at night. Still, it was a fun surprise to see a solo instance in which we play a minigame during a now daytime Graveholm. The Howling Lands is probably the least versatile zone, but it's improved by not allowing mounts in the area. That keeps what would be a tiny, easily traversable area feeling somewhat claustrophobic, while also giving the zone its own distinctive identity. Strange that this zone never required using the Coalescent Tracker, because it would have been the perfect place to do so. And while I don't love the fact that we never enter the large mansion at the end, given that it's the zone's only real landmark of note, What ultimately keeps this from being a Billabong tier mistake is that the area is called Howling Lands and not Spooky Manor in the middle of the forest. But what pushes a zone like Howling Lands over the edge, and really most of the other zones too, is the way it ends. There's been a trend ever since Mirage of ending a zone with a multi-battle gauntlet, usually a sequence of 3 rooms with a boss at the end. This is fine, but Darkmoor decides to get more playful with it. Instead, the Mortal Plains, Howling Lands, and Scholomance all end with what is effectively a 4-person raid, featuring their own unique areas and puzzles along the way. This is the closest we've ever gotten to those big, area-wide dungeons Wizard101 used to do in the first and occasionally second arcs. This is, I think, a much more varied and exciting way to capstone a zone than the Gauntlet-style dungeon we're used to seeing, and I welcome more in future expansions. It's the kind of capstone that adds a lot of flavor to the area it's attached to. My only request, be it Gauntlet or Raid, is to not put story-important exposition right in the middle of a dungeon. Since you often have to team up for these difficult instances, it means that this dialogue is either getting skimmed or more likely skipped completely. Darkmoor is now the second expansion in a row where this has happened to me, and it's not a great first-time experience to know you've missed something vital. That dialogue either needs to come before any challenging boss or after the dungeon quest is completed. I think I've outlined enough. Regardless of the actual size, Darkmoor provides a collection of areas I didn't feel I had understood everything about the second I laid eyes on them. And in the instances where I did feel that way, usually the zone would end up proving me wrong later down the line. Darkmoor is a world where I was continually being surprised. If nothing else, I think that's what I'm looking for in a zone the most. With Selenopolis and now Darkmoor, Wizard101 has shifted a lot of its emphasis onto the player character to make them a more essential part of the ongoing story. However, there's something strange about a few of the hoops the game has jumped through to get there. Darkmoor has an especially motivated reading of Wizard101's history, one I'm not altogether convinced represents Wizard101's reality. It's laid out pretty clearly in the tarot card dungeon. Keziah summarizes our journey across the spiral as an agent of Bartleby's will.
You are the scion of Bartleby, plucked from your homeworld to act as his agent during his time of blindness. With his eye of history soon to be stolen, Bartleby needed you to preserve the spiral, fighting necromancers and shadow queens and Grandfather Spider.
I can't say this is false, but does it ring true? Were we ever under the impression that the reason we went to worlds like Marleybone, Azteca, or Mirage was because Bartleby commanded it? I suppose it's true in a distant kind of way, but if the game hadn't directly outlined this for us, I don't think anyone would have organically summarized Arcs 1 through 3 in this manner. There is perhaps a severe over-indexing of Imperia Part 2 in Keziah's analysis. Notably, she omits the 4th arc from this part of the reading. That's probably because it seems very much like we went to Lemuria, Novus, and Wallaroo not for the Spiral or Bartleby's sake, but for designs. Altogether, it's not such a hard pill to swallow. I can accept an unintuitive summary like this for the sake of the story. Unfortunately, it's not the last pill these tarot cards want us to swallow. They also claim our mentors and friends from previous arcs abandoned us.
You have made many friends, but they do not travel with you. The professors of Ravenwood who once taught you to live in the Spiral. The Council of Light, with whom you defeated Morgant and asserted your place in our worlds. Grandmother Raven and her daughter, who helped you against Spider and to achieve your ultimate destiny. Even the Nothing, the entity you helped make real and taught how to live within society. All of them left you alone in the end as you trudged toward thought.
Okay, this one's just wrong. It's so wrong, in fact, we actually had an entire expansion with the singular goal of proving this assertion wrong. Granted, the expansion was a while ago, so you might not remember it was Selenopolis. Did that expansion not demonstrate that we had cultivated a robust network of allies and friends able and willing to help us? It was Khonsu who incorrectly assumed we were isolated in the Spiral, a rogue element that could be removed to repair his perfect system.
Whatever it is, Wizard, rest assured the Arcanum will support you through it. You saved Mallory! You saved us all! You will never be on your own.
Remember, whatever is out there, Whatever all the maniacs, crooks, and monsters you thwarted think of you, you will always have us. You will always have your friends.
Those were the literal last lines of the questline, and they came from one of the very characters Darkmoor is now trying to argue left me alone in the end. The thing is, though, the reason why Mallory never appeared between Imperia Part 2 and Selenopolis wasn't because she was ignoring us. It was because the narrative didn't call for her presence. The game is weaponizing artifacts of how it tells its story to retroactively generate a conflict. So what am I driving at here? It's that in telling us we've been doing the bidding of Bartleby this whole time, and that we've become lonely and miserable as a result, Arc 5 is trying to set up an assumed position for the player to take which will motivate our actions going forward. Namely, that it will be a good idea for us to throw off Bartleby's control. Arc 4 had an assumed position as well. Design was a person we would care about and want to help nurture to maturity. I found this to be an incredibly easy position to get on board with, because I found Design to be an instantly sympathetic character. Frankly, that fact was the most impressive part of Arc 4. However, Arc 5 has a much more challenging task. It's pretty clear the story wants us to feel conflicted about our role in the spiral, a divided loyalty between it and Earth, one or the other. Only, the game hasn't done that work. Darkmoor is singularly focused on whether or not to trust Bartleby. The expansion in a vacuum builds a decent case as to why we should feel reluctant. But beyond that, it's not established why we couldn't distrust Bartleby, help Earth, and protect the spiral all at the same time. That's clearly not what the scene with Miranda is implying, as it suggests we need to choose between the Earth or the spiral, but this is where my issue comes into play. The deck is 17 years stacked against Earth. We've only ever been given reasons to care about the spiral. Indeed, the tarot cards were the chance to make a case against the spiral, but we saw the game had to invent fabrications about our history and friends to do so. Thus, we can think about Miranda's offer in two ways. At present, we have no reason not to choose the Earth door, because it is not obvious our doing so negatively impacts the spiral. However, if future expansions clarify that this choice will exact some toll on the spiral, the equation flips completely. We have almost no reason to choose the Earth door, because Earth has not been established to mean very much to us. Notice, too, how these considerations occur completely irrespective of our opinion on Bartleby, because the game has not shown how distrusting Bartleby mediates either side of the debate. We don't actually know what the real dilemma is yet, is what I'm saying. The reason I flag this point now is not because it is a big issue now. I fully expect explanations to be happening later, but it will become an issue if the assumed position of the arc lands on us wanting to betray the spiral specifically for the reasons offered by the tarot cards. That our friends and mentors abandoned us, Bartleby has robbed us of a sense of belonging, and we thus feel a weak obligation to the spiral's peoples. The game cannot and should not leverage this reason because it is simply not true. Neither would it be good drama to have us go through the realization we are not alone, because again, that is what Selenopolis was. To summarize, the structure of the dilemma, according to Darkmoor, is that helping Earth will come at some cost to the spiral. It is not currently clear how this is the case, nor how wanting to save Earth necessarily follows from us wanting to reject Bartleby's influence. Furthermore, when this does become clear, the game will have to justify why the wizard might choose Earth over the spiral, even if this choice ultimately turns out to be a false binary. The problem right now is that Darkmoor seems to approach this question by downplaying our relationship to the spiral, presumably in an attempt to make choosing Earth seem more plausible from the get-go. I only suggest Arc 5 posit a more honest argument in Earth's favor. It just can't be that we want to help Earth because the spiral sucks, actually. That's a non-starter. Despite my long-winded trepidation, I must also admit the sudden discontent with Bartleby is by far the expansion's most fascinating attribute. Both Arc 4 and 5's inciting incidents are death, the death of the Old One and the death of Sybil, but their meanings are almost opposites. The Old One was a monstrous kind of person, knowingly participating in the displacement and subjugation of countless numbers of people. His great work, Lemuria, was consistently characterized as a project of evil, the greatest of crimes. Most of the arc had us cleaning up the mess left behind in his wake. Yet Arc 4 was animated by an optimism about the future. People could learn and grow. The Cabal, fighting to reclaim the false promise of the First World, would let that dream go. Santiago would go on a walkabout to absolve himself of aiding in the ideation of the world synthesizer. Even the Old One, at the end of his life, began to see the horror of his actions. And Design, retaining the Old One's memories and feelings, would carry on a quest to see his host's wrongs righted, to restore agency to whom it had been stolen from. Arc 4 was obsessed with fractured realities, worlds broken into pieces, institutions torn apart across ideological divides, all ready to collapse in on themselves. Arc 4 believed these things could learn to live cohesively again. Unity, reconciliation was possible. But that certainty seems to have vanished with Darkmoor. As the fifth arc's first act, Sybil, the dreamer of that unity, is killed, murdered, her fantasy pierced by cruel reality. In her place, only a grim forewarning remains. The future is dark. Bartleby sits at the root of Wizard101's newfound cynicism. Once a comforting, reliable figure now feels cold, uncaring. The game regards him with skepticism. We learn Ambrose once visited Darkmoor to put a stop to the curse. While there, Balaur gifted him the seed that would become Mortis. Sure, Ambrose didn't find a cure, but wasn't the attempt admirable enough? Runa interprets this meeting very differently, as Bartleby knowingly sending Ambrose to Darkmoor to retrieve the last spell tree and leave the world empty of his influence. If convenient, the Broken Branch wonder, would Bartleby be willing to sacrifice a whole world for the spiral's perceived greater good? It is the central question of the expansion. Undoubtedly, the world is in dire straits. Velma explains the vampires and werewolves and gargoyles that make up most of Darkmoor's population aren't different races, but former humans fall into a terrible curse. Former friends, former colleagues, former passers-by suddenly turn to prey on their fellow neighbor to enable their own survival. Anyone could fall to the curse at any time. And those few that flee the world are treated cautiously, for fear they might still be dirtied by its influence. Darkmoor represents a world of paranoia and fear, yes, but also a world without compassion. This is what the expansion argues is the true nature of the curse. Not the new fangs or fur or photosensitive skin, but a dullness of feeling. Runa describes the Scholomance, the origination of the curse, or perhaps the curse itself, as an absence, missing something in every sense of the word. In the mortal plane, we check on the status of several villagers marked for ascension to Castle Strigoi. Unsurprisingly, it's a vampire grocery list, most of the people on it either dead or marked for death. However, one of the villagers, Mina, was ascended. She used to enjoy listening to and creating music, playing on her harp whenever she could. But after her ascension, that feeling vanished. There is no want, no care, no caring at all.
There is nothing, you understand? No desire, just starvation. I used to hear music, in the wind, in the rustling of early morning footsteps, in the dripping of water. Now, I hear only a rumbling stomach.
The curse destroys the faculties of life, of enjoyment and humor and artistry. And with enough time, the cursed become convinced this emptiness is for the better. This fact is emphasized in the opposite way, too. Lucy becomes the first immortal to be cured of the curse thanks to recent developments from the Broken Branch. Now mortal again, Lucy's demeanor changes swiftly, noting a peculiar sensation after hearing we managed to rescue a few villagers lost in the woods. A dread, choking impulse called empathy to supplement her excitement. With the curse removed, the safety and well-being of others seems to matter that much more. This empty feeling is no mistake either. Darkmoor makes explicitly clear that cruelty is the whole point of the curse. The Scalamari, a cult attempting to recreate the teachings of the Scholomance, regard humanity as a weakness, and preach the precept that one should be heedless of morality, sympathy, or remorse. Sympathy is regarded as the antithesis of everything the Scalamari stands for. They kidnap children and force them into cruelty experiments, cursing them in the lagoon once they have fully accepted their version of the Scalamance's teachings. The Scalamari are quite correct in their understanding of the Scalamance. It is for this very reason why Balaur and the Hierophant are unable to reach the true Scalamance on their own. It, as Velma and Kasaya argue, is not a dormant thing, but an active agent seeking to corrupt and twist those with compassion still in their hearts. Since the Hierophant has long since rid herself of those pesky feelings, the Scalamance no longer has a need for her or Balaur. It can cast them aside in favor of new victims. Balaur confirms the truth once we unwittingly return him to his hallowed ground.
Darkmoor is a corrupt and decaying empire. I will burn it down, build a new Scalamance from its suffering, and the spiral entire will be freed from the tyranny of sympathy.
It is here where Darkmoor makes its most resonant note. There is something pointed in this motive. In an expansion released the same year, which began with a bishop beseeching a world leader to have mercy on marginalized people, only to be met with a protracted discussion on whether empathy is a sin or whether it is the fundamental weakness of Western civilization. Empathy's harshest detractors, like Pastor Joe Rigney, argue that an increasingly feminized world will see empathy's true evil realized, as feminism is a cancer which enables the politics of empathic manipulation. Through empathy's beguiling wiles, women in leadership roles may be convinced to abandon biblical confession for the purposes of helping an oppressed group, as an example. In this way, a more feminized church means a weaker church, and in Rigney's view, a weaker Christian society in which tyranny is inevitable. It seems on some level, it would be accurate to say Rigney is concerned about a tyranny of empathy. Darkmoor argues this is what we should fear most, a perspective which argues consideration for others is weakness, self-destruction, suicide. A worldview which suggests that life would be better by taking what we need for ourselves and paying little heed to the have-nots. This is the perspective which destroys unity, what makes the future dark. Balaur believes mortality is the key to entering the Scalamance. The Scalamance, after all, has no use for someone already cursed, someone who no longer has the capacity to engage in sympathy. But he is wrong. Darkmoor suggests that a true cure may be much simpler than any magical transmutation. Some immortals were able to reach the Scalamance. Runa recounts upon bringing Krintoth to the place, he turned to self-loathing and found a new resolve to end the curse worldwide. Keziah was able to arrive at the Scalamance on her own. She observed her own reflection and was unimpressed by what she saw. She would then help Velma escape the Scalamari and join the Outsiders to see them to safety. The curse is not as absolute as Balaur believes. Come face to face with their own selves, reckoning with what they've become, even the most long-lived in Darkmoor are able to have a change of heart. The Scalamance will never succeed in destroying sympathy, because compassion will always be an option. There is something even more pointed in the game rejecting the notion of a tyranny of sympathy, in an expansion where an overwhelming amount of its leading characters are women. I've only read 2 things by Edgar Allan Poe, but only really remember one of them. It was at the very start of the pandemic. Quarantine had just been put into place. Schools were closed for the foreseeable future, but teachers were encouraged to make an attempt at education by communicating with students virtually. It was there, locked up quietly in my room on a sunny Monday afternoon, that my AP Lit teacher decided now was the perfect opportunity to change her lesson plans and introduce us to the Mask of the Red Death. She made the right call. The story was absolutely enhanced by the morbidly funny context in which I was being introduced to it. Really, what good are English teachers to society if they aren't assigning plague literature during a plague? I can't say I have especially fond memories of that time, or my first year of college, but seeing Wizard101 do its own rendition of the Mask of the Red Death did unearth a forgotten sense of joy during those timeless months. I'd never go back to pandemic years, but I can at least appreciate how far I've come. This channel, for instance, it didn't exist back then. What's the point of it again? I guess I fashion myself as an amateur critic. critic has such a stench around it, though, an air of snobbery and superiority. The cultural prototype of a critic is a guy like Anton Ego from Ratatouille, someone who, as the scene goes, thrives on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read, but never wants to admit that the average piece of junk is probably more meaningful than our criticism designating it so. Of course, that's not actually the point of the scene. Ratatouille does believe in the value of the critic, as a person uniquely equipped to discover and defend new ideas and perspectives, to give those underserved things a voice when they would otherwise have none. I'd like to be one of those voices for Wizard101. Let's face it, this game is absurd. It has a tone I'd imagine is immediately disqualifying for most people. This is a game where you have to be able to take a plotline about a sleeper agent gummy bear uprising powered by gobbler sweat deathly seriously, or a group of European colonists negotiating with a sentient planet who are Mario characters for some reason. And soon we might be going to Earth. I had discounted the possibility back in Selenopolis because I didn't think the game would want to touch a depiction of Earth with a 10-foot pole. But now that they've put it into the spotlight, yeah, Earth is sure to be the peak of this game's absurdity. In a few years, we could be living in a timeline where someone might be able to say, my favorite Wizard101 dungeon is the Statue of Liberty, or the Taj Mahal. Hey bro, wanna farm the White House challenge mode with me? Could be a real sentence pointing to a real thing. The universe might actually explode. Wizard101 is not something you're going to get anywhere else. It's goofy, it's weird, it's clunky, it's culturally engaged in a way very few games have the gumption to be. I don't know that Wizard101 is the game anybody was really asking for, but I'm glad it's here. It's worth talking about.